Yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about Bad Thoughts. Tom Segura's new comedy series on Netflix. It is 6 episodes long, and it's like a mix and mashup of kind of short films, right? That's kind of what it is. First off, I want to say that I think that Tom Segura might be the smartest man in comedy. I think Tom Segura is quietly, like no one really talks about this, but I think he's actually the smartest man in comedy. And I'm going to lay out some reasons why. If you don't know Tom Segura and you just like maybe seen his face on Netflix for a comedy special, this guy has quite a lot behind him that the public eye, at least not his followers, that the general public doesn't know that's behind him. And that's what makes this show so incredibly surprising to me. When I watch this show is difficult to watch. It's extremely hard to watch. There was moments that I was crying, laughing, and there was moments I was reaching for the remote to say like, enough of this. I'm done with this. This is too much. I would not necessarily recommend this show at all. For reasons, it's extremely adult. It's as adult as you can get, but there are hilarious moments in this. And if you're a fan of Tom Segura's podcast that he does with his wife, Christina P., Your Mom's House, this show is kind of like very much the culture of their podcast. It's very crude. It's very edgy. It's very gross. It's kind of exploring the funny yet grotesque side of humanity in a lot of ways. They find a lot of humor in that, and that's what this show is really highlighting in a lot of ways, and it's just taken to the extreme. Now, with that said, there was a moment he's good friends with Joe Rogan. He went on Joe Rogan's podcast, and they were having a conversation like they usually do. He was promoting the new show, and there was this moment close to the beginning that I thought was super interesting to hear Tom Segura talk about, and I thought it was super valuable because he's a comedian that was interested in film and then in comedy film, right? In the writing and whatnot, and the creation and directing. And then he pivoted to stand-up comedy because he had better opportunities in that than he did in film, and now he's saying, I've reached like whatever height I want to be at in comedy. Now I want to put my focus back on where I actually really loved being, which is the creation of film, right? But this was an interesting place where he broke down his thought process on filmmaking and writing. Take a listen.
There's something about doing comedy that's offensive or even potentially offensive.
Yeah, the other thing is there's the offensive angle. I also think that they really shit the bed on literally backing truly funny material. Like so many studio comedies that are.
So right now they're talking about how studios have not supported good comedy movies and shows, and they kind of lost money, and the genre of comedy films and whatnot's kind of plateaued, or there's not a lot of money in it because they haven't seen a lot of success from those genres. And he's basically making an argument that they approached it wrong. They focused on the wrong things.
Are released. The critics, people are like, why didn't this work? Because it's not good. It wasn't funny.
Right.
It's not a funny comedy.
But don't you think part of that is because they can't take any real chances?
Yeah, I think a studio is always, like if you strip everything down, it's somebody that has to have some risk in their job. They're playing with millions of dollars and saying like, this will make us money.
Right.
And so, yeah, they start to get more apprehensive about it. The other thing is that the cost of some of these comedies, when comedies were really thriving last, which was I think like more than 20 years ago, some of these comedies started to cost like 30 million plus to do a comedy. Yeah, because sometimes you had like huge stars and huge set pieces, and you'd have these enormous budgets. Yeah, like right. Real. And now some of them, like Tropic Thunder, I think.
And I think that's when Hollywood was a bit more dangerous. Now I know Tropic Thunder was kind of an anomaly film, but if you even think back to the early 2000s, like they had some really funny comedies, even not the adult ones. Like even they had some really funny PG comedies I mean, that were like family-friendly comedies that were getting a lot of attention because they were actually written funny. And then they kind of lost their way because they started producing stuff that wasn't really funny. They started making it more about the funny actor than maybe the writing. I think he's about to make an argument for the writing.
I think did probably pretty well at the box office,
sure.
right? But a lot of them would not. And so it started to be like, hey, you know what? We can make this. That's why you see the explosion of certain genres, right? Like horror really has had a huge uptick the last decade.
I've been talking about this on this channel for a while. Horror is like a perfect genre for low budget filmmakers or indie filmmakers because you can make something that looks and sounds and feels very professional and scary and accomplish your goal without it being too cheesy and not have to spend a lot of money at all on it. Like, and Hollywood has done the same. Hollywood will make horror movies for $2-5 million easy, and that film will earn $50 to $100 million, right? So it's definitely a fact, and I think the point he's making is very similar with comedy.
Plus, because people can produce them for $5 million, but they don't realize that you can produce great comedies for $5 million also. You can, but you have to like prioritize the material first. It's got to be a great script, and they got to be willing to back it. You know, and I feel like they just haven't taken those shots yet.
So you have to be willing to back it. I think he's basically putting the blame on the studios. They're saying that they did not prioritize the writing. They did not take a chance on actually funny comedy because it might be too edgy. And then you look at this show and it's like Netflix. I do not know how on earth Netflix said yes to this show because it is as edgy as it gets, I would say. This show is rough to watch. It had me crying, laughing in some moments, and in other moments I was so uncomfortable that I wanted to run away from the TV. That's what this show is. I haven't seen anything like it. Why is Tom Segura, though, in my opinion, the smartest comedian in comedy? What about him sets him apart? Well, I've already mentioned he has a podcast, right? The interesting thing about his podcast is that he doesn't just have his podcast, he also has his friend's podcast on the same network. Like Two Bears, One Cave is Tom and Bert Kreischer and Tom Segura. On the same channel, you have Your Mom's House, which is the flagship show that is Tom and Christina, his wife. On the same channel, you have Rob Eiler and I'm spacing on her name, but it's the two kids from The Sopranos. They're really good friends with Tom and Christina, so they have their own podcast on Your Mom's House network. So he's built different than any other comedian, different than any business really. They have a whole comedy podcast network that is on the same channel, and so it cross promotes each other. He's been doing this for a long time. This is not something new. He's been doing this for well before COVID, so probably 8 years at this point, where they've had multiple shows on the same channel promoting each other and building up this culture of podcast comedy. And I would say, if I was to say who's had the biggest impact on comedy podcasting, I would say it's obviously Joe Rogan. You have people like Theo Vaughn, and then you have people like Your Mom's House. And then you have this new wave like Tim Dillon and Flagrant, right? And Bad Friends and whatnot. There's this new wave of podcasts. It's been around for 4 or 5 years, but they started and became really popular, but they started because people like Tom and Christina were doing podcasting and Joe Rogan was doing podcasting, right? So you have this core group of comedians who started the idea of podcasting, who really got in early, and then Tom is the only one who thought, let's build this out as a business and not just kind of like something we do on the side next to our comedy. I think a big reason for that is because he went into entertainment comedy with the intention of doing entertainment films, and then he found that it was more lucrative and better for exposure and better for his career to go the stand-up route. Now that he's reached a peak, he now has opportunities that almost anybody, like if Tom wasn't Tom Segura, if he didn't have a core foundational audience of hundreds of thousands of people that come to see his podcast every single week, a show like this would not be greenlit. But because he has 4 or 5 comedy specials that have been successful on Netflix, and he has a track record of saying like, hey, my audience is online. My audience is in the podcast, the creator economy space. They're in my own business. I'm not just like a lone wolf comedian who relies on the networks to get me exposure. I went and got my own exposure. And now I've built an entire business, not just on the fact that I have an audience, but on the fact that I've made smart business decisions through the process. And I think even what he's saying, where he's able to dissect an issue like with the industry in Hollywood and say, the issue where they screwed up is they didn't prioritize the writing. That's just like a glimpse into allowing to see how he thinks as a businessman, right? What works? What is the important thing here? He prioritized comedy over comedy filmmaking because it was better at the time for him. Then he prioritized creating a audience online through a podcast. He basically said, hey, this is like, we can benefit from bringing on other personalities. So not only does he have his own shows with his friend Bert, and they capitalize on that in a major way, Two Bears, One Cave, but then you also have his core podcast with his wife and all these other podcasts. So it's like, hey, this is how we have the most synergy inside of the comedy space, right? The adult comedy space in the creator economy. Let's build up a really cult following online. And then that has launched him to be like literally the boat that he stands on top of that is able to sail around and give him all the opportunities, where instead of trying to swim across the ocean, he's able to sail across it, right? And I think with Bad Thoughts, this is a show that nobody would greenlight. I'm positive of it. This thing's way too edgy, but because it's Tom Segura and he has audience of people that are going to watch it, and because he's been smart and prioritized the stuff that matters in the modern world, in the modern realm of entertainment, really, it's allowed him to get opportunities he wouldn't have before. So, lesson from this, I mean, focus on what actually matters. As like for me as a filmmaker, if you're a filmmaker or you're an artist or you're in some field, like what actually moves the needle? What's actually, if you look at technology, you look at the viewing behaviors of audience members, if you look at in your industry where the money is and what areas are, generating the most amount of income for your business, actually focus on what matters and stop focusing on all of the noise and get while the getting's good. Even if it feels like you're trying something early and it might not work for 10 years, well, in 10 years, yourself will thank you, right? I'm sure Tom today, at the release of this wild show, Bad Thoughts, is probably very thankful for Tom Segura 10 years ago, where he prioritized doing the podcast with his wife and building out this company and not trying to stay in film when he knew he needed to get out and do something different for a while before he can come back to film with a vengeance in a lot of ways. He can actually come in roaring instead of just treading water the whole time until he eventually sinks because he didn't have that core audience. So focus on what matters, even if it's the unorthodox path to take in a specific field.